will this policy stop the boats? Is it akin to what happened in Nazi Germany, as a football pundit claims? Well, let's talk to a man who, as I say, played a very instrumental role with dealing with Australia's migrant issues. Professor George Brandis KC is the former Australian Attorney General. He was also, until rather recently, the Australian ambassador to UK. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Juliet.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us from the other side of the planet. You, though, of course, even though Australia, a much bigger country, rather more space perhaps to take in large numbers of people from around the world, but also much further away from many other land, you had to deal with a migration issue. So we'd love to get to the details of how you did that. First up, your first reaction, you will have seen what Suella, Braverman and the Prime Minister have had to say about their policy. Do you think their policy will work?
Well, I expect it will work because it worked in Australia. And this policy, it was announced by the Home Secretary yesterday, has three virtues. It's lawful, it works, and it's necessary. And the experience we had in Australia where we solved this problem about 10 years ago when I was the Attorney General and I was involved in the development and implementation of the policy, shows that what you need to do is to deter people smugglers from arranging, sometimes at a very high price, I might say, for people to use their services to unlawfully cross borders. It's a false argument to say that these people are entitled to refugee status under the Refugee Convention. If they're genuine refugees, they are entitled to be treated as such, but that doesn't mean that they can pick and choose which country they seek asylum in. The United Kingdom is perfectly entitled, as is Australia, to protect its borders. Now, Julia, there's also a humanitarian dimension here, because as we've seen in the Mediterranean and in the Channel, and as we saw in Australia 10 years ago, people are drowning. Men, women and children are drowning because they're putting themselves into the hands of dangerous, vicious people smugglers who couldn't care less about their welfare. And the reason that people smugglers are able to persuade them to pay money to secure passage is because they think they will get into the United Kingdom. We stopped the problem in Australia by taking away from the people smugglers the capacity to assure those potential customers that they would get into Australia.
And that's the key message there, isn't it? Because we're constantly told, the likes of our Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, that what we need to do is we need to tackle the smugglers. The people smugglers are the problem. But the reality is you could arrest every single one of them today and tomorrow there'd be another 1,000 ready to do the job, because it is such a lucrative international criminal trade now, isn't it? So for you, it's about the deterrent factor of you're not going to be able to stay in the UK, so there's no point paying that £5,000 to the people smuggler, but also the fact that they're not going to want to try to come to Britain, so they're not going to be basically paying for that people smuggling trade.
People smuggling or people trafficking is one of the most evil international crimes, and the gangs and syndicates who run it are very sophisticated. But they are, at the end of the day, they're businessmen. They're doing it for money. And the only way you can be sure of stopping it is to make sure that you break the people smugglers' market. You break the market by ensuring that they cannot deliver a product, that is, a delivery outcome to the United Kingdom, to their customers. That's what we did, as I say, in Australia 10 years ago now. It took a period of time, not a very long period of time either, by the way, and completely stopped the problem.
What about the issues with international law? You said, first of all, one of the three virtues of this new bill was that it was lawful. The front page, literally the front page of the illegal migration bill says this may not be actually compatible with our human rights international laws. That is going to be an issue. Do you think that shouldn't be an issue? Do you think that we have a right to override these things? Do you think that if we do, that Britain would become something of an international pariah?
Well, there's a sovereignty issue here, of course. Now, I'm not going to comment on the European Convention on Civil Rights, but I can comment on the Refugee Convention, which is the principal document in international law. Under the Refugee Convention, a person can seek protection if they answer the definition of a person being persecuted for political, religious, and certain other defined grounds. But the country to which they appeal isn't obliged to take them. It's obliged to keep them safe, and it can do that either by allowing a domestic resettlement outcome, or by sending those people to another country where they are not at risk of persecution. Now, in Australia, we did that by a policy called offshore processing. We resettled people who put themselves into the hands of people smugglers in another country at which they were not at risk of persecution. And that is the heart of the British policy, as I understand it, to send them to Rwanda or somewhere else where they are not at risk of persecution. If the British government, under the UN Refugee Convention, ensures that in its handling or treatment of such people, it does not refool them, which is the term used in international law, does not send them back to where they were at risk of persecution, it is within its international legal obligations.
Okay, just finally, you lived here. I said you're the ambassador here. Of course, you're the High Commissioner for Australia here in London for a number of years. You'll know Gary Lineker well, former England captain and, of course, Match of the Day pundit at the BBC, paid at £1.35 million a year of our taxpayers' money. He tweeted yesterday, "Good heavens, this is beyond awful about this new migration bill." He then said, "This is just an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language that is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. What do you say to that, George Brandis?
Well, I never, in fact, met Mr. Lineker. I think it's a good rule of thumb, Julia, to regard commentary on international legal issues by sports stars and sports commentators with a grain of salt. He's entitled to his view. What he says is nonsense. As long as the United Kingdom stays within its obligations under the UN Refugee Convention, and for the reasons I've explained, the way this policy works, it will, then it is on the right side of international law.
Okay, perfect.